Hi gang, heavy themes this week on the Joy of Football podcast. We start with Martin's letter from the Gantry, which is about Newcastle United.
And we have three of the best with the big clubs involved: Tottenham, Aston Villa, Manchester United and Newcastle United.
We need to talk about follows. Who succeeds Newcastle as the great Underachievers? What do we make of Liverpool's season now that there's only the league to go for? And what do we make of the three promoted teams almost certainly being relegated from the Premier League for the second consecutive season?
And we like our comparisons, don't we, on the Joy of Football? We've got managerial comparisons this time, both club and international.
And if you like the Joy of Football, please do subscribe. If you want to get on to more involvement, go on our Patreon site. And don't forget, you can read us on substack.com, where we are under the Joy of Football, Martin's letters and my musings. The Joy of Football podcast. With me, Neil Barnett.
And with me, Martin Tyler.
Looks for a shot in! Rooney! Aguero!
The Joy of Football. Hello, the Joy of Football podcast with Martin Tyler, the greatest commentator in the world, and me, Neil Barnett. Time moves on, and Newcastle have won their first trophy in 56 years, their first domestic trophy in 70 years, and Jordan Henderson has been recalled to the England squad after what seems like 56 years, having played for his country for what felt like 70 years. Martin, you remember 70 years ago, so we don't need to go down that path with you. We're going to start with you today. This is Martin Tyler's letter from the Gantry.
Letter from the Gantry.
Neil, thank you. Yeah, we're going to start on a topical note. So ends one of the major and very memorable statistics regularly trotted out by football commentators. No longer Newcastle United have not won a major domestic trophy since 1955. That the hoodoo was broken 70 years later has a really nice ring to it. Destiny, maybe. Congratulations to the Geordie nation. For many, it will be Newcastle's first domestic trophy of a lifetime, but not for everyone. The first radio commentary of a football match I believe I ever heard was the 1952 FA Cup final. In those restrictive times, only the second half was covered live by BBC Radio. Newcastle versus Arsenal. I remember the description of a catalogue of injuries to the Gunners, and that George Robledo, a Chilean-born, Yorkshire-brought-up striker, won the game near the end. It was a fascinating name for a young ears. I was 6 at the time. This turned out to be the last FA Cup final not broadcast live on television. Newcastle were lifting the cup for a second year in a row, and in 1955 they made it 3 triumphs in the competition in 5 seasons. Now 9, I was glued to our TV screen from the very start, just as well as the Magpies' iconic forward Jackie Milburn, or Jackie, scored at Wembley after just 45 seconds against Manchester City. Newcastle romped home 3-1. And that was that until March the 16th this year. But there have been a fair number of near misses along the way. In 1974, I was the junior of a legion of ITV reporters covering Newcastle reaching the FA Cup final after a gap of 19 years. There have been plenty of recent recollections of that match because the opposition was, like now, Liverpool. Malcolm MacDonald, Super Mac, was the star, and I interviewed him a week or so before the final about himself and his teammates. We then did additional filming of those who had outside interests for the build-up to the actual game. For example, goalkeeper Willie McFall was a skillful carpenter. Defender Frank Clark played the guitar. Malcolm's strike partner, John Tudor, ran a driving school. Different times. The club decided to take the players to London on the Tuesday before the game to escape the pressures at home. By the Thursday, they were bored to tears. On the Saturday, they were comprehensively beaten 3-0. A young Kevin Keegan was Liverpool's star. No one that day could anticipate the massive influence he would have on Newcastle United subsequently as player and manager. In 1976, it was the League Cup final, Newcastle's first, which led to a Wembley return and further disappointment. A 2-1 defeat to Manchester City, whose decisive goal came from a spectacular overhead kick from Dennis Stewart, Newcastle born, a Newcastle fan as a boy, who'd won the FA Cup 3 years earlier with, of all clubs, Sunderland. Now under Kevin Keegan, Newcastle came second in the Premier League in 1996 and 1997, the entertainers, but never award-winning in the silverware stakes. Then followed 2 successive runners-up in the FA Cup in the 2 following seasons. In 1998, Kenny Dalglish's team came up just short against Arsenal, who completed a League and Cup double in Arsene Wenger's first full campaign in charge. It was the first FA Cup final shown live on Sky Sports, and I recall Alan Shearer hitting the post when a goal would have made it 1-1. A teenage Nicholas Anelka made it 2-0 shortly afterwards. Newcastle and Shearer were back in 1999, but not Dalglish, who'd been succeeded by Ruud Gullit. As a commentator, you usually get a sniff of the lineup before the big day, but not on this occasion. More significantly, neither did the Newcastle players, pretty much until they arrived at Wembley. The uncertainty showed. Again, they faced the champions, Manchester United this time. Again, they lost 2-0, and United went on to complete their treble by beating Bayern Munich in the Champions League final. Just 2 years ago, it was Manchester United again in the League Cup final. Again, it was a 2-0 defeat. The chances of lifting the trophy somewhat scuppered by a goalkeeping crisis. First choice Nick Pope suspended, regular deputy Martin Dubravka cup-tied, from a loan to Manchester United, no less, and crazily, he got a winner's medal. Third choice Loris Karius had played in the Champions League final for Liverpool, but was understandably undercooked. This was his Newcastle debut. Pitfalls of the past meant these downfalls on the brink of success. This time, there was a more kindly twist of fate. A sinkhole suddenly emerged in southwest London on the pitch at AFC Wimbledon, where Newcastle were due to begin their Carabao Cup campaign. At short notice, the tie was switched to St James's Park. Newcastle only just scraped through with a penalty. Who knows what might have happened if it had been played as drawn out as an away game. The League Two club had already knocked out Premier League Ipswich there. However, the subsequent elimination of Chelsea, Brentford and Arsenal and now Liverpool is clear evidence that the best team has won. Finally, it has been a fully joined-up journey. Eddie Howe, first and last to leave his workplace every day, has been rewarded not just for his constant endeavour, but for his very perceptive management. His loyal staff and a group of shrewdly recruited players have delivered the goods. Nor has it been a spendfest from their super-rich ownership. Football's financial regulations have kept that in check. It was emphatically Newcastle United's day at Wembley, followed by celebrations with more than a nod to the frustrations of the past. 70 years, almost worth the wait.
Couple of things out of that. Do you remember seeing Jackie Milburn?
Oh, yes, yeah.
What was he like?
Well, he was an all-purpose forward. He could play as the man up front. In the 1955 Cup final, I don't think he wore the number 9. Vic Keeble was the player who wore it then, and Jackie was number 8. So he had more than just that touch in front of goal and that association with the iconic Newcastle number. So, an international player. There were a lot of players around competing to play in the England team at that time, and of course, no substitutes as we've seen so often in these games. In that 55 Cup final, I believe Manchester City had an injured player, Jimmy Meadows, I think it was. So they sort of limped through with 10. I had to just check the facts on the 52 game, but I do really remember hearing it on the radio. Arsenal, in fact, finished with 7 fit players. Really? So sometimes your luck's in And I suppose if you say they used up a fair bit of luck winning those 3 trophies in 5 seasons, 3 FA Cups, they paid for it with a long wait until they finally got some silverware in their hands again. I really play. I mean, listen, you support Chelsea, I support Woking, but we love football. We love the lack of the fact that the same thing happens over and again. We love these occasions which are special. So I think, apart from the Liverpool fans, and to be fair, Liverpool have got nothing to be ashamed of in their performance or the fact they've had a tough week. It's still a fantastic season for them. But I think that the rest of the world were black and white for the day, you know.
Yeah, I also remember when Liverpool beat them in the 74 Cup final. You might not have seen this as you were working there, but in the post-match interviews, I can't remember which station it was on, Kevin Keegan was interviewed with Emlyn Hughes, who was the captain, and Emlyn Hughes was kind of a little bit over the top and said we absolutely stuffed them, or was quite dismissive of Newcastle. And Keegan went, "Oh, hang on, we don't talk like that." And Keegan put Emlyn Hughes captain in his place because Keegan had certain standards that maybe Emlyn Hughes didn't at the time. So,
but it was a very one-sided final, and I'm sure, and I've spoken to a lot of the players from that time over the intervening years, that they definitely shouldn't have gone on the Tuesday. No. And that was I can understand why, because the pressure in Newcastle last week would have been enormous, and Eddie got them to a place of retreat but not that early. Of course, they played on Monday night. I saw them play on and win. That was a really significant thing, Neil. I had a bit of a gut feeling from that it might be Newcastle's week. The celebrations at the final whistle of winning 1-0 away at West Ham for a Premier League game. Obviously, they're trying to get in the Champions League through placings in the league. But there were real. It was not exactly over the top, but it sort of had a feeling that they were thinking about the week ahead and what it might mean to actually win that game.
I've got a war going on here between my cats. Someone get rid of that horrible cat.
It's quite hard talking to a camera when this fight between man and cat is going on in my eye line, but I hope you understood what I said and it made sense for once.
Okay, that was just Tamori trying to mark Tammy Abraham there. Right, okay. That was from the Gantry. This is 3 of the best.
It's checking for cats. And he makes them pay.
3 of the best. He's made them pay. And that completes a wonderful hat-trick.
Young player, old player, player. This is where we get into people we just want to talk about. Martin, young player.
Yeah, it just counts. I think we've skirted this age thing in the past, but at 24, coming up 25, Ryan Sessegnon, I tried to bring to the table for this section of the podcast things that I've actually been at. I was at Fulham's game against Tottenham, and Ryan Sessegnon, of course, had left Tottenham, having left Fulham. Marco Silva used his substitutes brilliantly, actually, and Ryan was one of them. Rodrigo Muniz had come on and scored, helped by Adama Traore and Tom Kenny, our friend of the Joy Football, also played a part coming on as a substitute. Ryan came on and got quite a spectacular goal at the time, 1-0, which probably just about right for Fulham, but a very tight game. And then he virtually, he did seal the deal. And my impression was he didn't quite know how to celebrate. He was 5 years at Spurs, but he played, I think, about 30-odd games in the 38 Premier League games in 5 years. He was loaned out one season to the Bundesliga, but he has so many injuries. So he really, having left as a hot prospect, and Fulham got 25 million, I think, from Tottenham for him in 2019. It never really worked out, and he was a regular England under-21 who was going to step up into the senior team. That's not happened. And the Fulham fans were singing Ryan Sessegnon, "You're one of our own," and the Tottenham fans were thinking, well, hang on a minute, we had him for 5 years, but they didn't see the best of him. So Ryan was in that camp. somebody told me that Zinchenko scored against PSV and didn't celebrate
because he played 12
because he
games for them.
played 12 junior games for them or something. Or was it first team games?
I don't know.
Well, first team. And that was a long time ago. So I respect that the players have their own personal views on it. But anyway, Ryan was caught betwixt and between, really. And he was a long way away when he scored from the Tottenham end, so he could have pushed it a little bit. But I was really pleased for him because we talk about players getting injured. We don't actually ever suffer with them, and that kind of rehab, trying to get back to what you were before. Whether he'll be, of course, he's a twin, a famous footballing family. Stéphane Sessegnon played for Sunderland, set up the famous G goal that won the game. I think it was his pass that one of the many memorable games that I was lucky enough to commentate on. So the Sessegnons have been about, and Ryan's definitely about at the moment. So even though he just sneaks into the young player, I want to say well played.
I'm delighted for him because I saw him when he was still a schoolboy playing youth team football, and he had a big reputation then, and I just thought he didn't have a football shape. His body was I just didn't think it was a football shape, and I'm sure that's led to the injuries. And it would be brilliant if he could now have an injury-free period if his body has kind of grown into a more football.
Yeah, he's got a couple of goals now in recent times. So.
Fingers crossed for him because he's definitely got quality. Yeah. I've got two young players this week. They're both definitely young, 22 years old, both of them. Paris Saint-Germain's Nuno Gomez, left back.
Nuno Mendes?
Nuno Mendes, yes, thank you. Left back, Nuno Mendes. He's had a lot of plaudits coming into the team, but he has struggled at times. He's had a lot of plaudits getting into the Portuguese national team, but he's struggled at times. But he seems to be improving very, very fast. And he kept Mohamed Salah pretty quiet in both games. And that was a good opportunity for Salah bashers to say, there you go, big game, and he hasn't turned up. Salah's turned up all over the world, being absolutely sensational. And Nuno Mendes deserves huge credit for the two performances. Absolutely brilliant. Interesting because he's 2 years younger than the guy who I thought for about 5 years now is the best left back in the world, Alphonso Davies, at Bayern Munich, and he seems to be coming strong again. He scored in the Champions League this last week. So interesting. But Nuno Mendes, really, I don't think PSG have had a good left back since Ibrahimovic left and Maxwell kind of had to go and leave with him soon after, I think, because he had to go wherever Ibrahimovic went. I thought Maxwell was an outstanding left back for PSG, who never quite got the credit he deserved because there were so many other Brazilian left backs ahead of him. But this guy, Nuno Mendes.
When he had a shot, Maxwell, we all wanted to say as commentators, Maxwell's silver hammer. you have to be a Beatles fan to understand that.
Yeah, one of their worst ever songs. My other youngster is Pedri, who, of course, Barcelona has suffered so many injuries, having played so much as a 17-year-old when he came into the team. He's back, he's fit. And I read a statistic that said he has won the ball in the central third of the pitch more times this season than any other midfielder in the top 5 European leagues.
Wow.
So that's England, Spain, Germany, Italy and France. And Pedri is known more for what he does with the ball rather than simply winning it. That's what really got me about that stat. And I've watched a couple of Barcelona games on television recently, and they are really beginning to impress. I saw Bayern Munich live when Hansi Flick was their coach. He won the treble, of course. He's now the coach at Barcelona. He seems to be getting an awful lot right, and a lot of players. Rafinha obviously is and Lamine Yamal, but Pedri is back, and
the game's better for it because he's a wonderful talent.
Old player.
This is sort of going to go on to my player, but again, I'm talking about games. I commentate on both Aston Villa games against Club Brugge in the last round of the Champions League, and of course they won them both. But in the second leg, they were 3-1 up from the away leg. In the home leg, the Belgian team had a player sent off very early in the piece, very early in the game, and yet
For a foul on Marcus Rashford.
yeah, last man denying a goal scoring opportunity. It was outside the penalty. It was the probably Nicky Hine, the bright young Club Brugge coach. His expression was, "There's no way out of this. VR, I'm going to come to our rescue" or anything. But they were very passive, Aston Villa, after that. And I thought, well, that doesn't really matter, does it? They're 3-1 up, they're playing as 10 men to play out the second half. As a commentator, I was thinking, I'll make sure I've got one or two little tidbits up my sleeve, but I don't go through the notes, see if something at half time that I could use in the second half. But Emery had obviously said, this isn't good enough. This really isn't good enough. So he made changes and he sent them out on the front foot, and they scored 3 goals in 12 minutes earlier in the second half, and gave the fans who pay, remember at the start of the season there was a lot of talk about how high the Champions League ticket prices were at Aston Villa, but I think they've probably got value for their money. But it was going to just drip away into a game that they were going to get through and maybe save their energy, although I don't think they played again. They didn't play again for a while because their game was, they were supposed to play Liverpool the following Saturday, and that was obviously played earlier because of the Carabao Cup final. But I just thought that was brilliant management, and he wanted more. He wasn't satisfied. I know a lot of managers who said, "Well, let's take the result, 0-0. We've won it away from home. We're through." And he wasn't, and he really pushed them. And you could see, and his expression hardly ever changed. He didn't get any great joy. He was obviously very, very annoyed with the lack of activity in the first half when the circumstances were very much in their favour. So they made it tell in the second half. And we sometimes find it hard to be specific about management, but I think that I'd like to have been on that half-time team talk. I'm only suggesting. I have no evidence. He didn't come out and tell me that that's what he said. But the truth is, the proof of the pudding was on the pitch, and they looked like they'd had a boot in the rear.
He now faces one of his former clubs
Yes.
in the quarterfinals, Paris Saint-Germain, Unai Emery. He didn't really have a successful time at PSG. He didn't really have a successful time at Arsenal. That you could argue they're the two biggest clubs, certainly with the biggest histories.
He won 7 trophies domestically at PSG, and obviously they have their Trophée des Champions and things like that. But in Europe, you're absolutely right. And of course, he was the manager when they were 4-0 at home and they won against Barcelona and lost 6-1 away.
He was also the manager. I think they got knocked out of the cup by some lowly team, the French Cup. But I think, I just wonder if he's. He turned Sevilla into a big club. Really, he kept Valencia in the Champions League when they had to sell their best player every year because they were bankrupt, or near bankrupt. He's been a brilliant manager of clubs that aren't quite at the biggest level. It'd be very interesting to see if he got a big club again now, if he could do.
Well, he
something
could win
with
the
it.
FA Cup, which would be like Newcastle winning the Carabao Cup.
It would.
1957, there's a couple of years in it, but not much more.
Yeah.
And so they of course, Aston Villa v Preston resonates for a historian, my side of brain that's a historian. The two great clubs, the two clubs that did the League and Cup double in the 19th century, and then it wasn't done again until Spurs in 1961.
Just one other question on Unai Emery. I know absolutely nothing about him as a person or historically. Was he a player?
Yeah, well, midfield player, I think, attacking midfield player, but not with any great pedigree. Often the best managers are the ones whose playing careers have been cut short, or who've not quite reached their. Arsene Wenger wasn't too much of a player, I don't think.
No, but can we agree with Emery that on the touchline, he has the most unsporting movement of any manager going?
That's a good competition. That I'm not so sure that. I would.
Very jarring, jagged movement.
No, he's listen. he lets them know.
Oh,
and having let them know, he didn't smile too much. He does his trademark celebration on goals. Obviously, the intensity of when you're a coach and a team that scores a goal, it's a great feeling. But he didn't. It wasn't, oh, well done, lads. You know, that they would have been reminded how the first half went, even after they'd won the game 3-0 and gone through 6-1.
Sorry, one final question on him. Do you not sense amongst journalists that there was no warmth towards him when he was manager of Arsenal? Because it was, apart from anything else, it was so difficult to understand what he was saying in press conferences or what have you. And now at Villa, there's an awful lot of warmth towards him as he's become more familiar.
I've got no evidence of that, really. He's always very polite for the television companies, and of course he's famous good evenings and good afternoons. It's a lovely way to start, especially if you don't speak the language. If you go to a Frenchman, you go bonjour. You know, I'm thinking what else I might say afterwards. So I think he's a really interesting person and a very good football manager.
Right, good. My old player is your mate Alan Shearer. I've gone for him because of his celebrations, obviously, that we saw in Newcastle, winning Newcastle fans, Newcastle supporters, enjoying the moment. Two Southampton players, he and Matt Letizia, decided to go with their hearts. Letizia stayed with Southampton all his career, but Alan Shearer, having left Southampton and gone to Blackburn and won the league, having turned down Manchester United, I think, when he went to Blackburn, turned them down again in order to go to Newcastle, and as a result didn't win anything apart from that one league triumph at Blackburn. Do you think, as he clearly thinks, he got the most out of his career by going to Blackburn? By going to Newcastle, sorry.
You never know. You can
I think he did, because I think he got.
No, I say you asked me what he thinks.
I think he got the joy of football. Yeah. What do you think?
He got the joy of football, and he's proudly in the difficult times. He got a couple of mentions in the letter, didn't he, for coming close in the FA Cup in the league as well. He gave it absolutely everything. His injuries were, I think, probably started in his time at Blackburn, but
it was the big one. I was there in '97 at Goodison Park in the Mercantile Trophy pre-season.
He certainly had the pain, but he would feel that the gain was worth it, and the number of goals and to score. The only thing I can draw a comparison with, Neil, I've been a Woking fan all my life, and I ended up on the bench as a coach, and we got promotion. And my contribution to it was very limited. It's just in the dressing room and on the training ground, very, very, very small part of it. But I was part of it, and it meant the world. It really did mean the world. So, if at the level that he's done it with his hometown club, in the way that he's done it, scoring the goals and to be there, and as we speak, Woking are one game away from Wembley. Maybe there'll be a little bit of standing there, and I'm now not connected with the first team at all. I help at the academy, but it's tough semi-finals come, so I shouldn't even be speaking about it. But it's that emotional connection is part of it. I think we can see it as fans, as viewers, as broadcasters, journalists. You can see when it really means something. There's a lot of kissing the badge for show, not in Alan's case. And I know he had a great day, and he's not the only one. The stacks of all the ex-players would have liked to have been there, and of course they couldn't. Wembley wasn't big enough for that, really. But I think television coverage was excellent, and I think the message. I've had a few messages from friends in Australia just about what it meant to around the world for a Newcastle win. As I say, not just because they're supporters, not supporters really, but just feeling the romance of the day.
Okay, we go on to player this week. You've got two.
So the first one, obviously, connection with Aston Villa and Unai Emery. Marco Asensio, who obviously has come from Paris, and you mentioned Unai Emery. And this is something that really rankles with me, that in the Champions League, Marco Asensio can go and play for Aston Villa against the club that is his parent club. And yet in the Premier League, it's deemed to be not acceptable. And I just don't get that. I think it's an insult to the integrity of the lone player and the clubs. And I just think it's a rule that could be ripped up. Anyway, Marco Asensio came on in Bruges to play Club Brugge. We've had many Brugge. I've heard a few debates actually on the radio about why should we call them Club Brugge after all this time. They were always with Bruges, but that's their name. The argument for that is we call the team from Naples Napoli, but we don't call
Sevilla.
But we don't call the team from München. We call them Munich.
Yeah.
So we
call them Paris and not Paris.
Yeah. I throw the old Paris in, I think. But there are arguments on both sides. Anyway, against Club Brugge, he came on. It was his 50th Champions League. This is in Bruges. We can say that, I think. That he came on for his 50th Champions League appearance as a substitute. And scored the third goal from the penalty spot. It was his 10th goal in those 50 games. So fast forward 8 days, he comes on at Villa Park again as a substitute. So 51st Champions League appearances, scores twice in those 3 goals in 12 minutes. So now he's got 12 goals from 51 games as a sub. I don't know what he's got to do to earn a start, but his record as a starter is 3 goals in 20 starts. So there might be something that players hate to be called the super subs because they'd rather be starting the game. But he's done so well, and what a shrewd acquisition, of course, in linking in big moments with Marcus Rashford, who you mentioned earlier. And the other, I can't go. We've got Manchester United fans who put the cameras up and edit our podcast and make us look as well as we can possibly look at our times of life. But Bruno Fernandes has to get a mention. I think he's got 95 goals for Manchester United now, with a cluster recently. He seems to be getting even better within the difficulties. He's assuming greater responsibility. They've tweaked his position a little bit. He's the highest scoring Portuguese midfield player ever, I think. Over 200 goals, counting his work in other countries. And he's got that sort of Marmite feeling about, he's a bit petulant, but what a player. I mean, I have to say, the ability to score goals, create goals, it's been all been evident again. And a time where Manchester United really need to dig deep. He has dug even deeper than he's done before, and he's been putting out fires at the club for a number of seasons now. So well played to him, and they're still in Europe. And maybe there is something to happen at the end. I think it's going to be a fascinating end to the season. But with all the Champions League qualification places, that Villa and Arsenal are still in the Champions League, that Liverpool have lost a couple of games, and maybe now it'll be a bit more of a nervy run-in, although they so deserve to win the league. I wouldn't wish that on them. So there's a lot going on that we should be very grateful for. The joy of football is being experienced up and down the country.
We've also got here an Arsenal supporting producer who I'm not talking to after their 1-0 victory over Chelsea. I think he's horrible. But I did have a very good full English.
His name is Michael, not Mikel.
I did have a very good full English down Holloway Road.
Right.
I took your advice for the 1:30 p.m. kickoff and had brunch.
Yeah, brunch is a lovely meal. Actually, it's probably my favourite meal. You don't have to get up too early for it, and you can still give it the full English.
My player is Dan Burn of England.
Well, of England's squad.
Yeah.
I would. I knew you were going for him. He certainly is in my envelope as well. Top go. Off you go.
I was first aware of Dan Burn, I suppose, when he was at Wigan, because Reece James was on loan at the same time, and I was looking at Wigan games and what have you. He then moved to. I was aware of him at Brighton, and in fact, there was. 6'7", is he something?
6, I think, maybe.
And there was a game.
You do shrink when you get older. He's 32 now.
Yeah, there was a game at the Amex where he was playing either left back or left wing back. I don't remember. And he and Reece James ex-teammates went for the same ball in the air and collided, and Reece James came out better, and Dan Burn dislocated his shoulder. And Reece James stayed away from him, but then as he went off injured, actually had the courtesy to go up and say, "Bad luck, mate." I'm sure you've spoken to him. I've interviewed Dan Burn, and he is a really relaxed, lovely, gentle giant.
He is a top guy. I've seen him get angry on the pitch a few times, but one particular when he scored for Newcastle at Fulham in the FA Cup, Fulham, one of his old clubs, and he was about 3 yards out, and he bashed it in, and ran away sort of like with take that, and it was obviously left Fulham probably on not the best of terms. Funny enough, I first met him. I actually didn't. I spoke to him briefly on the pitch. He played in a pre-season game for Fulham against when I was coach at Kingstonian, having just come from Darlington. And Alan Dowson, the manager I've worked for, comes from Gateshead, and Dan was very raw. And I thought we might be able to nick him on loan. These pre-season friendlies are done with a purpose. Occasionally you try at the club. Well, yeah, we've had a nice day. Yeah, we can for a month. And of course Fulham turned it down, but we did. So when I see Dan, I go, well, imagine how your career would have gone if you'd have come to us. And his replies, well, that hasn't gone too badly, has it?
Do I think I've ever felt that he was England quality? No. Do I think I've ever felt that he was a top player? No. Do I think every time I see him he is better and better? Yes.
Do you think that first time Thomas Tuchel got the England job, we thought Dan Burn would be picked
because he loves tall players.
He does too. And he was left back. Don't forget, he was playing left back until
and I think he'll be
problems.
I think my bet is that Tuchel plays 3 at the back,
and he'll be the left of the 3.
But I think Dan Burn has earned his place in the squad, and I just think he's a breath of fresh air to football, because he is in the age where everyone has to play. He's been able to play at 6'7". I don't know how his brain talks to his feet. I wouldn't have thought it was possible, but it does, and I'm delighted.
The one thing about him is that I don't think he scored enough goals, really.
The header in the Carabao Cup final, it was from the edge of the area, for God's sake. Yeah.
But he uses his head literally like that, the outside of his head and the inside of his head, and most of all, he plays with his heart.
Brilliant,
and it's a great story. Dan of the Geordies.
Right, we've still got comparisons to come, which is managers this week, and I'm really looking forward to that. But first, we need to talk about, and we're going to start with who succeeds Newcastle as the great underachievers. Martin, I've made a list here because there are just so many, but I've thrown Arsenal in just to annoy our producer, and I've thrown Manchester United in because they deserve to be in to annoy our other producers. But Aston Villa, Everton, Tottenham, West Ham, Leeds, Sunderland.
You can't have West Ham. They've just won a European trophy, so.
But they've won so little over the years.
Yeah, but they're West Ham,
Well, this is it.
You're putting it relative Manchester United having a rough time. Look at their record. If you're a Manchester United fan, you just hang on, look at this.
Yeah, and to be fair to Manchester United, even since they last won the league, which is now 12 years ago, they've won a Europa League, 2 FA Cups, 2 League Cups, and they could still win a European trophy again this
Eric
year.
Ten Hag, 2 trophies. Don't knock that. I mean, it was like, you're supposed to win the Premier League or the Champions League. You didn't do that. Hang on a minute. There aren't that many trophies out there.
All right.
He's won 2.
How big a club is Aston Villa?
It depends which generation you look at, really. But it's quite interesting in Birmingham because Birmingham City are having a fantastic backing now in terms of the regeneration, a bit like Manchester United are going to try and do around Old Trafford. Theirs will be funded by the local council and by an American owner. Now Villa have got, I think they've got very good ownership now. They've got a very good manager. We've just sung his praises. They have the potential to be what they were, which was European champions. Certainly in my time, not obviously a lot of people listening won't remember that. It's one of the great grounds. You and I agree on that. Yep. It's great to commentate there. You love going there. It's got a lot going for it.
Since they won the European Cup, as it then was in 1982, they've won 2 League Cups and nothing else. And they've won nothing this century. It
will rankle. They've been relegated as well, which...
So they're in the running. Everton. Well, last won the league in 1987. They've won 1 FA Cup since, and this is Everton.
5, yes.
This is the Everton who
right out.
Yep. Yeah. This is the Everton who won 2 or 3 league titles. 3, I think, in the 19. Well, they won in 1969-70.
And they had a great period under Howard Kendall.
2 in the 80s.
Yeah, and FA Cup winners, European Cup winners, Cup winners. But it's been very difficult for a longer period of time. I mean, they haven't gone down. Villa did at their lowest ebb and got back. It's the oldest played fixture, isn't it? I think right from the beginning, Villa v Everton. That's something we trot out every time we get assigned to it. And the new ground, and the new coming with new ownership and a recalled manager, if you like. I do think that they can look forward with optimism. But again, if you judge it by, we're going to mention Spurs, a long time since they've won silverware. I get a bit befuddled by it, because if the very best team can win more than one of these trophies that we've seen with teams like Manchester City, then there's not much left to go for, and I don't like judging managers by what they win. I think you judge them by the way they've improved their football clubs, and it's been a tough act through the leading up to the reappointment of David Moyes to keep Everton afloat, and that's a success. Sean Dyche did that. Frank Lampard did that, and you've got to give them credit for doing that. So. Underachieving is if you don't improve, and Everton found it hard again this season, but there are signs of the shoots of recovery, and the stadium will be very special, I'm sure. But they've got to get used to playing there, so that might take a little bit of time.
I started broadcasting in the USA in 2007. I then was regular from 2010. And one of the things that the Americans never, ever understood me saying, ever, was that Tottenham are a big club. And they said, how can you be a big club if you don't win anything?
Well, a simple answer to that, you don't have a draft where you pick the best players to the worst club, which is what defines American sport. Why do you think the Americans have come over here? Because no draft. So they can buy whoever they want.
Well, the other reason they come over here is to make money.
Well, yeah, but that's how they make money, because you're not tied in sacrificing the fact that you've got to have a draft. It means you can never be relegated. So there's no jeopardy. That's what they can't take. There's
jeopardy. A lot they can't. But what they couldn't understand was that me growing up and seeing Tottenham win the double. The first team in the 20th century to win the double. It almost didn't stir in my head that they hadn't won the league since 1961. They were just a huge club with a big following.
They've only won the league twice.
A strong deal.
1951 and 1961.
So my question to you is: are Tottenham a big club, and are they in this search for who succeeds Newcastle as the underwhelming?
I mean, if you define it very specifically with winning leagues and winning trophies, they were for years they were the cup team, decades. They won lots of cups, 60s, 70s, European trophies. They've got a record, a CV. I mean, if you're going down the last...
first English club to win a European trophy.
Yes, that's absolutely right. Yeah, back in '62.
Yeah,
62. I think they're a great watch. They've been a great watch. At the old White Hart Lane was a wonderful stadium. The new stadium is at the moment the best in the world. I'm sure there's some being built even as I speak that will challenge that. But that's the representative of a big club. I mean, if you want to look down at underachievers, that's teams like West Brom or Wolves or clubs that haven't. Being in London puts you under the microscope, of course. But I just think it's a free market here, and sometimes you get lucky. Tottenham didn't make that much use of it, but they got Gareth Bale for not very much money and sold him for zillions and refurbished the squad. So if you get one or two of those come your way,
Modric as well.
Yeah, you can do things like that.
Well, since they last won the FA Cup in 1991, they've won just 2 League Cups. And the last of those was in 2008. So in my estimation...
Who did they beat in that final?
Chelsea.
Yeah, but I know. I'm winding you up.
I know, but it's the only time they've beaten Chelsea with any significance. Actually, they lost... They got to the 2002 League Cup final, beating us in the semi-final. And they lost to Blackburn.
1967
FA
Cup final.
I was there.
1967.
Yeah. I want to bring up 2 other clubs. Leeds. Do we call Leeds a big club?
Well, I worked for Yorkshire Television for a number of years, 5 years, and I think they were coming down from being a really big club. And I'm not sure they've regained that status. I mean,
they won the league in '92, the last year before the Premier League.
They did,
and they haven't won anything since. So I think you can call them a big club, but they've been limited by Elland Road, which is a reduced capacity on what it used to be. And I think the capacity is only about 30,000 now. Can you be a big club with a 30,000 capacity?
No.
No. I feel that.
And I think there are all sorts of factors that come into this mismanagement. Even the bounce of a ball. A ball hits the post. I mentioned Alan Shearer hitting the post in that cup final. Then people would go, 1999, that's a nice resonance with 55, doesn't it? We go, and every year that there's 2 numbers the same, we're going to win something. Is that close? Those are the things that define. Of course, the facts are there.
Okay, let me throw one other club at you, Sunderland.
The Bank of England club in the 1950s.
Yeah, and they've got a 48,000 capacity stadium. They last won the league in 1936. They last won a major trophy in 1973, the FA Cup. I mean, I think it's very interesting that they produced Jordan Pickford and they produced Jordan Henderson. I mean,
you have to be called Jordan.
Yes, yeah. But I mean, two absolute stalwarts of England over the last 10 years and whatever. I mean, I really like.
But I've seen the 1950s, the Bank of England, and they've been up and around it, but they've always been up and down since then. If you look at it in the time, Huddersfield were a massive team in the 1920s. Bolton Wanderers have had periods. Preston, we've mentioned earlier in the context, they're still in the FA Cup. Proud Preston, the Invincibles, the only Invincibles before Arsenal. You're judging it.
But Sunderland it is a city now, but it used to be a town until about 15 years ago.
Yes.
And its catchment area isn't like Newcastle's catchment area, even though Newcastle's only 10, 15 miles up the road.
That might be the definition of what you're seeking to prove here. The catchment area, London clubs have a big catchment area. So Tottenham and Arsenal can coexist as leading clubs side by side. Liverpool and Everton, Merseyside, big catchment area. This is just locals, let alone the tourist attractions, across a park from each other, side by side. But from Newcastle to Sunderland, Newcastle a one city club, a one club city is what I'm really trying to say, and and so they've always had that. Although their gates, looking back, their gates were 20,000 in the 80s, things like that. So it's not always been there, but the game hasn't been marketed. I think if you define it in the Premier League era, I think you've got to look at it separately, because the marketing really started, and the projecting it. Well, we did have the match, the Saturday 3:00 kickoff that went around the world in the 70s and the 80s, which I was part of broadcasting. And games went to Scandinavia, and there was a lot of interest in Leeds, who were doing very well in the 70s. A lot of older Scandinavian fans are Leeds fans. So we're judging it by what today brings. Today brings riches for the rich. And therefore, the definition of a big club, I suppose, is if you can't translate your riches, your catchment area, into trophies.
Right, that's it. Tottenham. Okay, decided. Right, I'm happy. Okay. I don't hate Tottenham. I love
this
them.
does not necessarily reflect the views of the rest of the...
Right, we need to talk about Liverpool's season. People were talking quadruple. They weren't. Let's get that straight. So they went out of the FA Cup at Plymouth. They went out of the Champions League on penalties against PSG, but the alarming thing there was just how outplayed they were in Paris
in the first game,
and how they couldn't score a goal at Anfield, and they went out of the Carabao Cup in the final, but deserving to lose. I'm sure they'll win the league, although it's not done and dusted. My one concern about Liverpool, and I only have one concern. I mean, I don't give a you-know-what, essentially, because I'm not a Liverpool supporter, but you know what I'm saying. My one concern about Liverpool is that they do tend to struggle at the end of the season, because they seem to put so much into their game during the course of the season. And it's happening again.
Whether it's happening again because of that, I'm not so sure. I think they have issues that are difficult to deal with, that are under the surface. Who's going to leave at the end of the season? I think that is definitely a niggle, and probably that's a crack or two that's been papered over by the way that the team has done so well in the league. And he took a chance with Plymouth. Arne Slot doesn't know the culture too much of the country. Obviously, he probably followed English football, but you take a risk going to a championship team with half a team, really. And he came out and said it. We actually applauded him for saying it. My players had not enough experience of men's football. What a thing to say, but he was right. And that's not so much Liverpool's fault, it's the system's fault. So that didn't pay off, and obviously it was very marginal against PSG. The second game was much. Personally, just watching it, I was pretty sure that Liverpool were going to get the goal that would get them through, but it didn't pan out that way. And PSG is a heroic victory for them. That happening on the Tuesday, Newcastle had won on the Monday, and hadn't got any injuries, and so it was going to be difficult. If you just looked at it without really just looked at the week, you'd say, well, the team that's got no injuries, although there are many points behind them in the league, and had an extra day to recover, although they travelled, of course, which Liverpool didn't. But they came out of their game 24 hours earlier much better than Liverpool came out.
And it was
a
90-minute game as opposed to a 2-hour
extra
game
time as well.
Penalties,
yeah. So if you and I had, it's not being wise after the event, like I looked at the team sheet, and many people, it's not me being smart ass or anything, I looked at the team sheet at Plymouth, and you think, well, Plymouth have got a chance here. You looked at the week leading up to the Carabao Cup final, you think Newcastle have got a chance here. And on both occasions, those chances came up. So how Liverpool deal with it is going to be the next question. Of course, it's an international break. As we speak, I don't know which of the players, if any, who have not gone out to countries they've been called up for. But I would be surprised if the whole lot went out because of the efforts that they put in the week. Playing at Wembley after the back of extra time is the most demanding thing to do, and they came close. that's what they've got to remind themselves. And both these exits, and even Plymouth, they came close. You know, they've gone out by the slenderest of margins possible, really, in those three matches. So I think they've had a brilliant season. I think the way they play is very watchable. They maybe don't pass the ball forward quite as much as they did under Jurgen Klopp, but they still do that at a time where I think we should be looking at teams that pass the ball forward and how often they do it a bit more analytically than we do. Everywhere I go, people are talking about the stats, or I believe, this is going off message really, but I do believe that players are aware of their personal stats, and that has a negative impact on their freedom of thought during a game of football. I really believe that, and something should be done about that. Don't let them have the stats.
Don't let them have social media.
When I was coaching, the last real club I coached at for any period of time was Dartford, and we had the GPS things on for the players and distances, and we didn't tell them because so you didn't ring quite as much last time, or we can have a look at it. But why do you think, why do they need to do this? Why you can look with your naked eye and say you didn't play very well today. We've got to do this. It doesn't really matter what the data tells you. You can see.
They've got 9 league games left, 27 points. They only need 20 points to get into the 90s. That is a terrific season.
It
whatever
is, but I don't think that matters. Winning the league is how many points do they need to win the league?
Yeah,
and that's all that matters now.
It's
a 12-point gap, isn't it? So
I think it's a fantastic.
You'd win the
season.
league by 1 point to win the league, and to win it with the, as we mentioned last week, the potential to have celebrations in the stadium, which was denied by COVID last time. So good on them. They've contributed an awful lot to the season. And this is, what are you judging it by?
No, if you win the league, it's just a brilliant season.
The rest, forget the rest.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Totally agree. Right, the final we need to talk about. This looks like being the second consecutive season that the 3 promoted clubs to the Premier League are going to get relegated. Let me just give you the bottom of the table as it stands after 29 games. Southampton, a miserable 9 points. Leicester and Ipswich, both 17 points. And the next team up, Wolves, 26 points. Last season, the year finished with the 3 promoted clubs going down. After the 38 games, Sheffield United had 16 points, Burnley 24, Luton 26, and the team above them that had been docked 4 points, Nottingham Forest, were on 32, so it would have been 36 without that. That would have been a 10-point gap. And the only other time that it's happened was in 1997-98, as long ago as that, when the bottom 3 were Crystal Palace with 33 points, Barnsley with 35, Bolton with 40, and in fact, Everton survived on goal difference that year, also 40. And we're talking a lot more points there than we're experiencing now. So that issue is getting worse. Why?
Well, I don't think a general gap between the levels, I suppose, but I think they're specific for the clubs. I mean, what is worrying, and no disrespect to them, but you've got clubs you've already mentioned, Sheffield United, Leeds, Burnley,
and 3
looking like they're going to come back up again, or pushing hard to come back up again. They've gone about it different ways. I think Leicester made a mistake in getting rid of Steve Cooper, personally. I think he would have kept them up. And because Ruud van Nistelrooy had done well as a caretaker at Manchester United, it was a sort of it was a bit of a step into the unknown, really. And
Steve Cooper was a backs to the wall manager, which is how he got Nottingham Forest established in the Premier League. Ruud van Nistelrooy is a front foot manager, and it looks now as though Leicester need to have their backs to the wall because they're no better than that.
No, it's I think Wolves, when when Cunha's on fire. Cunha's got them so many points that the points difference between where they are now and the bottom three alone, and he's back now, as he served his suspension, or maybe one game to go. They've got somebody like that the other teams would cry out for. I mean, I saw Southampton get promoted in the playoff. I went to the final against Leeds. They deserved to win that game, but there wasn't much in it. One goal. No one would have thought then that they'd be in a position like this. You can say, well, Russell Martin stuck to a philosophy that didn't, a bit like Vincent Kompany with Burnley
the season before.
So maybe that's a specific for there, but not to kick on. I mean, I saw them play Newcastle at home earlier this year, and they went one up actually, and there was a sort of optimism. I was very impressed with the Southampton supporters sticking with the team. They lost the game, and there is no Alan Shearer or Matt Letizia you mentioned earlier. Tyler Dibbling is certainly someone we're going to hear a lot more of. But
he was only on the bench when they came to Chelsea. Tyler Dibbling, everyone was gobsmacked. Yeah. I mean, I have an issue with these promoted clubs. I do have an issue, as you can imagine. I would have an issue, and that is that the managers are playing the kind of football that got them up, maybe where they were the best footballing teams, but when they come into the Premier League, they're not adapting. And they're not the best footballing teams; they're the worst footballing teams. I don't think
Ipswich are that. I mean,
well, I think Ipswich have made
Ipswich come from the third tier. So.
Yeah, but Ipswich have made the terrible mistake to me of looking for a goalkeeper who can play out from the back when they desperately need a goalkeeper who's going to win them 10 points a season. And that would have made a huge difference. As it is, their goalkeepers haven't won them hardly any points at all.
Well, Alex Palmer, he looks like he might be the answer to that, but he's only had a few games, obviously.
But, I mean, they've thrown away so many games with their goalkeepers gifting goals because theoretically they can play out from the back. It's a load of ghoulies. It really is. I'm not having it.
They don't overplay Ipswich, and they've got one of the most brightest, powerful young centre forwards in the country, and they've used him to good effect. I mean, unfortunately, football is not a one-man game. If it was a one-man game, I think Liam Delap would have kept them up.
Yeah, but
any problem at all,
the goalkeepers aren't doing their jobs, and Southampton have had injury issues with Ramsdale, but Ramsdale, it's going to be his third relegation. There's a message there, folks.
And he's made some brilliant saves. But you are right. The principle is, let's judge a goalkeeper by the saves he makes that keeps us in the game or wins us a game, and making spectacular saves when you're 3-0 down, it doesn't really count for that much. And I looked at goalkeepers with that in mind, and I'm pleased that Alex Palmer's got a chance at the highest level. He's worked. He's mature enough to deal with the pressure of it, and he obviously had a great start on his debut, but. I think they're just a little bit. So they spent quite a lot of money, Ipswich. So
yeah, I think Leicester are the one team that I feel a little bit sorry for, because obviously with the whole KP King Power thing, that COVID affected them because they made up their money from duty-free goods, and there wasn't the movement that there had been before. They lost their chairman, who was so involved in running the club through that dreadful accident, helicopter accident, which must have affected everyone in the team and everyone in the club, because it was not only such a close-knit club, but it was also so the accident was at the end of the game. So I do feel that they've been affected maybe more by circumstances beyond their control than the other two. But they have bought so badly. They bought so badly when they've been replacing the players they've sold.
But we are glorying teams now that have just survived that initial year, Forest and Brighton and Bournemouth.
Exactly.
And teams that have really managed to get through that very awkward first season.
But Forest bats to the wall to begin with, and they're still bats to the wall, but with a little bit more flourish up front. Bournemouth were very pragmatic under Eddie Howe as they established themselves.
They went down, of course, and then they'll come back, and this is their second stint at it. But they are a fine footballing team to watch. So,
and Brighton started with Chris Hughton backs to the wall, and then changed and went more front foot.
He lost his job really because of that. They felt he couldn't get into the front foot football. But it can be done, and so these teams sometimes just have to say, look, you made some wrong decisions, bad luck, 3 have to go down, and your decisions weren't good enough to keep you up.
Yep.
And that's because if you do stay up, I mean, Brentford is amazing.
Yeah, I think it again, another team that doesn't maybe go in the let's play football from the back route as a kind of dictatorship, even though they can. I feel it is down to the management. I really do, to the coaches, and I think they are not serving their clubs well. These clubs that get promoted, they're not being pragmatic enough.
Well, 2 of the 3 clubs you've referred to have changed their managers, and Kieran McKenna, having got them from League One,
they've got to stick with him.
He deserves another.
Yeah, but next time, get a proper goalie, Kieran. Right, we're going to finish today with comparisons, and we've got a couple of comparisons, which involves 5 people and their managers. So, comparisons: Eddie Howe and Harry Redknapp, the last 2 English managers to win an English trophy.
The Bournemouth connection. That's not the obvious connection. That yours is much more relevant, but obviously Eddie Howe made his name. Bournemouth means everything to him. Harry Redknapp, he still lives in the area, and obviously started his managerial career, I think, with a heavy defeat with his first game as a manager. Very different people.
I didn't realise until our producers, who know so much about football more than I do, told us this morning that Eddie Howe was Harry Redknapp's first signing as manager of Portsmouth back in 2002.
Really?
I didn't know that.
No, I didn't know that. No.
And there's a photograph of Eddie Howe looking like a sweet teenager.
Well, he still looks like that now, doesn't he?
No.
He looked a bit harassed during the game.
Yeah.
At the end, the years were shed. And, brilliant for Eddie, and I'm sure Harry's been sending messages and whatever. They're very different people. I know everybody knows Harry Redknapp as a gambler by nature. That's a gambling football, as well as having a few bets and owning racehorses. I'm not sure that Eddie Howe is that way inclined. He might be. He's a much more private person. Harry's lovely, everybody's mate. They've got great. He's being Harry Redknapp professionally now. We've talked about Pele and people like that becoming something that they can market. They don't have to be in football to do it. And Harry's always in demand. He's wonderful company. He's got a story for every occasion. But he was a very, very good manager. And
he should have been England manager.
I think
after Tottenham, he should have been England manager. Yeah.
That was, he went to Tottenham, didn't he? They were in terrible state at the start of the season and not hardly any points, and 7 or 8 games gone. So he's put the miles in, put the matches in. And
he was though an old-fashioned manager. He was the kind of manager who, if he had a big bet on the horses and it failed, he'd go in and he'd run them in training the next day.
Are you telling me that? I don't know.
I do. I've heard complaints, but I mean, he managed with a real passion.
And he wasn't just a manager. I've seen him on the training ground. I think as he got older, he probably has a very good staff working with him. Kevin Bond, Joe Jordan, people like that.
Frank Lampard Senior.
Frank Lampard Senior. Yeah, a really good, a real football background from being a young whippet of a winger at West Ham. I can remember seeing him play.
Yeah.
And Eddie, of course, a playing career that was really truncated by injuries and into management very young. I would say Eddie is the man of infinite detail, and Harry is the one who would trust a gut feeling more than.
And I think Eddie Howe is calmer. Eddie was passion. Harry was passion, and Eddie is reason.
Yeah, I mean that's true. They are obviously they're linked by this. It's a great result for English coaches. Eddie winning the Carabao.
How contemporary, how modern is Eddie Howe in terms of all the data that everybody uses?
Extremely modern, but he would sift through it. Other people collect the data, and he would look at it and see what matters and what doesn't matter. I mean, things like I'm trying to remember where the game was where he took home to Brighton in the FA Cup. Was it Isak? He took Isak off, and they lost the game in the FA Cup. And I think I'm getting this right. There's so much happened recently, and the reason was that he wasn't fit he couldn't risk, and of course he went to extra time as well. So he that kind of data, he would listen to it. Maybe Harry would have said, "Oh, keep going." I don't know. I'm conjecturing, but there is a big difference. But they are bound now by this great thing for English football that they've got trophies on their CV.
And our second comparison is three people: Thomas Tuchel, Fabio Capello, and Sven Eriksson, the three foreign managers of England.
Well, I can tell you a bit. I mean, Sven was calm and, God rest his soul, he was a lovely person, very, very rational, and knew how to talk to players and shout and rant at them. The documentary tells you, that's out there, it's an award-winning documentary that tells you all about his great qualities. He was very kind to me as a person, and I was very, like so many people in football, very saddened by what happened to him. I think Fabio Capello was more, this is a job, this is how I do it, this is how I manage, and maybe a little bit more rigid in his application.
Do you think also Fabio Capello became a man out of time? He was still playing 4-4-2 when others were going 4-3-3, and it was
by far the best player of the three. I would say that.
Oh yeah.
But I would say Sven was very hard to ruffle. Fabio would have his moments, but Thomas has a reputation for going off on one in the dugout, and we'll see whether he'll be able to act appropriately in his new job. We all wish him well.
I think you can say that Thomas is the most charismatic of them as a manager. He's the one who goes into a press conference and
as a person, I would say that whether it's on the field or I've met him a few times. He lived in the village that I live in actually for a little while when he was in charge of Chelsea, so I saw him a few times. He's got genuine charisma, and that will work, I think, with the England players. But we're speaking in the dark here. As I say, I wish him well. I don't think these two games are going to tell us a huge amount about how good England will come in the 18 months that he's got to try and win the World Cup. I mean, that's quite a task, isn't it? I mean, the others have been brought in to improve England to try and get close to winning trophies, but it's never been really spelt out that you're here to win the World Cup, or you're here for the World Cup. But why you're only here for the World Cup? Well, we expect you to win it. And that's a very, very big ask. I mean, yes, of course, all the tradition, all the near misses, getting closer, all this stuff, but it's still a huge ask to do it in
Europe,
in a very difficult, very difficult format. But he'll have a right go, and I think the practicality of his selection suggests that he knows the players, and that he knows, even in the short term for this window, that these players have got to play. Whether they're here for the longer term, there'll be hope. He'll be getting some players fit again. The left back situation, I mean, I think England have paid a price for playing Luke Shaw in the Euros, and he's hardly played a club game since. So there are things like that issues, but it's never a perfect scenario. It's a better situation coming in to try and win the World Cup than trying to defend it. And I think if he had the choice, he might not have taken it as to go again. It's it's been the whole thing, as somebody, and you remember 66 as well, but a lot of people don't, what it meant to the country is what winning the Carabao Cup meant to the Geordie country.
I think
because it would be like that everywhere.
I think because Sven never got past the quarterfinals, and because Capello was just so incommunicative, really, because he, especially with his limited language.
I don't think Sven committed himself to England, living in England. I don't think Fabio Capello ever did that.
But I think
whether Thomas does, he's lived in England, but he seemed to be jumping backwards and forwards quite a lot during the time since he's been appointed. But
I just think with Thomas Tuchel that he at least has got the chance to go to a semi-final, and people will say, "Oh, well, it's no better than Gareth Southgate, but it would be better than the other two." And I think that's almost the starting point for him.
Is he the tallest England manager? I would imagine it might be the tallest England team. Listen, I don't mind practicalities. I mean, all this sort
You're
of how
biased.
You
How tall are you?
6'3".
He's biased.
I was 6'3.5".
Yeah.
But as I say, you do shrink a little bit with age.
Yeah. I was 6'4" when I had hair. And then
well, there's visual evidence.
Right, that's it. And guess what? Because there hasn't been a VAR, we don't need stoppage time.
Thank goodness for that. That's what everybody's listening saying. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being with us. Please come and join the way you can message us. We love the interaction of it. You know, we go off on our own wandering meanderings. You can put us back on the straight and narrow. And I personally always like to hear the messages, as Neil would say, good, bad, or whatever. But please let us know, because we're doing this. We are doing this for us, but we are doing it for you more than for us. So if you're with us, join us in terms of communication. Let us know what you think.
From Martin and me.
See you.
Try. Thanks for listening or watching. Don't forget Patreon, subscribe, Substack.com. The joy of football, unless you're a Chelsea supporter.